As we know from the readings, media is consumed very frequently by adolescents, a lot of this being television, which frequently include messages of sexual content. Today I will be examining one of these examples and showing you what I found. So I define sexual content in a few different ways. Visual sexual content, which could be something like kissing or nudity shown. Verbal sexual content, which could be characters having explicit conversations about sex directly, or sexual innuendos, which could be suggestive lines, maybe a conversation that kind of points at sex but doesn't say it directly, and then inappropriate sexual behaviors or sexual violence, which we did see a little bit of. I chose to watch the show Riverdale. I watched the first 2 episodes of it, which were about 45 minutes each. And this was a show I had never seen before, but I know that it is geared toward the adolescent population and that many adolescents watched it when I was of adolescent age. So in these first 2 episodes, I examined approximately 15 examples of sexual content. I believe this was about 10 in the first episode and then 5 in the second. There were a lot of sexual innuendos that I noticed in the show. For example, one of the main themes is that some of the girls are on the cheer team and they're very sexualized. Everything they're saying is very flirtatious. Their outfits seem to be not appropriate to what you might find in an actual school setting. And also, some of the dances were very provocative. I also think that one of the messages this shows is that in order to be pretty and wanted, you have to be sexual. There's also a big message of love triangles being very normal and acceptable. While I do think it's pretty normal for 2 adolescents who are friends to maybe have a crush on the same boy, the show kind of takes it to a whole new dramatic level. There's a scene where Archie, who has been friends with Betty for a really long time, Betty just became friends with Veronica, who knows this about her. Veronica and Archie end up doing 7 minutes of heaven together, which leads them to make out in a closet. And although the show does show how Betty feels betrayed and backstabbed and upset about this, it's kind of brushed off and they become friends again right after this. I don't think this is very typical for a situation like this. Another one of the main themes in the show so far is that Archie is having a secret sexual relationship with his music teacher. This is where most of the sexual content came from in the first 2 episodes, and it was heavily portrayed as being secretive and exciting. While I haven't watched the rest of the show and I don't know how this pans out, I do think that it's very harmful that so far the show is kind of diminishing the aspects of harm that Archie is receiving from being in this inappropriate relationship. Not even relationship, by being groomed by his music teacher. Another version of sexual content being visually represented there were a lot of nudity shots. These weren't complete nudity shots, but there were a lot of scenes with boys and girls having their shirts off or being in sexually explicit outfits that were not appropriate for a 16 or 17-year-old to wear. I included this picture above as it shows when Veronica and Betty walk into the boys' locker room. All the boys are shirtless, and it's just kind of a weird scene if you think about how this is supposed to be high school. Overall, the content displayed in Riverdale is not reflective as to the values I grew up with. For example, mutual respect, realistic expectations, communication. All the teenagers seem to just come and go into their parents' house. They never really tell them what they are, where they are, and they disrespect the rules very often about who they're with, where they're going. While this is typical, it's very idealized and exaggerated. It often sends messages that relationships are dramatic, highly sexualized, and fast, and that your attractiveness determines your worth. Boundaries seem to come below passion, especially in the example of the teacher-student relationship, and that secrecy improves romance. It's also very clear that these are not actual teenagers, as they are actors and actresses. They look much older to me personally, but it again just kind of sets unrealistic expectations. Overall, this really goes to show that it's important for parents to have open and honest communication with their teenagers and adolescents about uncomfortable topics such as intimacy, relationships, and especially boundaries. I think this show really goes to show that, but I think it's also clear for, or it's also important for parents to have clear expectations and rules for their adolescent.